Friends, thank you for being here today. We find ourselves at a moment in history that future historians will likely mark as the definitive end of the post-World War II order. For decades, Canadian foreign policy and our sense of national security have operated under a specific assumption, that the United States, despite its occasional political volatility, remained the ultimate guarantor of Western security and the rule of law. That assumption died this week. It did not die with a whimper, but with a shock that has reverberated from Copenhagen to Paris, and now, most critically, to Ottawa. The events of January 6, 2026 have fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape. We have witnessed the President of the United States threaten the military annexation of a NATO ally,'s territory, Greenland, while simultaneously invoking 19th century imperial doctrines to justify the arrest of a foreign head of state in Venezuela. In the face of this chaos, however, something extraordinary has emerged. Rather than retreating into diplomatic silence or engaging in futile shouting matches, Canada has stepped into the vacuum. Prime Minister Mark Carney's response to this crisis was not one of panic, but of precise, surgical positioning that has completely turned the tables on the narrative of American dominance. For those of us who have spent a lifetime watching the slow, steady evolution of Canadian sovereignty, this is the moment we have been preparing for, perhaps unknowingly. This is not about political partisanship, it is about the survival of the state and the protection of our resources, our borders, and our way of life. To understand why Carney's move in Paris changes everything, we must first dissect the nature of the threat we face and why the old rules of alliance no longer apply. To truly grasp the gravity of this situation, we must look past the sensational headlines and analyze the structural breakdown of the Atlantic Alliance itself. The threat issued by President Trump regarding Greenland is not merely bluster or a negotiation tactic for a real estate deal. It is a dismantling of the collective defense guarantee that has kept the peace in Europe and North America since 1949. When the president refused to rule out military force to annex Greenland from the Kingdom of Denmark, he effectively nullified Article 5 of the NATO Charter. This article states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Denmark is a founding member of NATO. By threatening a founding member with military action, the supposed leader of the alliance has become its greatest existential threat. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen's response was chillingly accurate. If the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. She did not say, relations will be strained. She said, everything stops. This is the language of a total diplomatic rupture. For a generation that grew up during the Cold War, understanding NATO as the bedrock of our security, this is a profound shock. But we must analyze the logic being used by Washington because it has direct implications for Canada. The administration is employing what they are calling the Monroe Doctrine, a rebranding of the Monroe Doctrine. This is an assertion of Washington's right to exert authority throughout the Western Hemisphere, viewing it not as a community of sovereign nations, but as a sphere of influence and resource extraction. We saw the kinetic application of this doctrine with the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. While few in the West would weep for the Maduro regime, the method of his removal, direct U.S. military intervention to enforce a change of government, sets a terrifying legal precedent. The justification offered by the White House for the Greenland threat is equally concerning. President Trump claimed that Russian and Chinese ships were surrounding Greenland, using the logic of encirclement to justify annexation. This is identical to the logic Vladimir Putin used to justify the invasion of Ukraine, claiming that NATO encirclement necessitated a preemptive seizure of territory. When the leader of the free world adopts the strategic rationale of authoritarian aggressors, the moral and legal framework of the West evaporates. Why does this matter to a retiree in Ontario, British Columbia, or the Maritimes? Because if the logic of encirclement and resource security allows the United States to threaten the territorial integrity of Denmark, there is no legal firewall protecting the Canadian Arctic. Canada possesses the world's longest coastline, vast untapped mineral resources, and the Northwest Passage, a maritime route the United States has long refused to recognize as internal Canadian waters. If Greenland is viewed simply as a strategic asset to be acquired for American security, we must assume that the same lens is being turned toward the Canadian North. I have to pause here and ask you directly, do you believe the United States still views Canada as a partner, or have we become merely a strategic resource in their eyes? I'm curious to know your perspective on this shift. Please let me know in the comments below. This systemic collapse of trust is nowhere more evident than in the vacuum of leadership currently paralyzing Europe. The reaction in European capitals confirms that this is a systemic collapse of confidence. In the British Parliament, we have seen scenes of genuine disarray. The United Kingdom, historically the bridge between Europe and America, is finding that the bridge has collapsed. British politicians are openly debating whether the United States can be considered an ally if it violates international law so brazenly. The internal debates in London reveal a terrified realization. Europe is exposed. For decades, European defense strategy relied on the American nuclear umbrella and the presence of U.S. troops. Now, European leaders are gathering in Paris not just to discuss Ukraine, but to answer a silent, terrifying question: who do we call when Washington is the aggressor? This is the context in which the sphere of influence realignment is taking place. The world is moving away from a global rules-based order to a system of regional bullies. Russia claims Eastern Europe, China claims the South China Sea, and the United States is aggressively claiming the entirety of the Western Hemisphere and the Arctic. In this new world, middle powers like Canada, Denmark, and the UK are expected to submit. However, submission is not a strategy for survival. It is a strategy for decline. And this is where the narrative shifts, because while defense analysts expected NATO unity to fracture within days of Trump's threat, something else happened. Canada stepped forward with a sophisticated counter-strategy that uses diplomacy as a shield. Mark Carney's actions in Paris represent a sophisticated understanding of modern power. Faced with a belligerent superpower next door, a military confrontation is impossible. Canada cannot outspend or outgun the United States. Therefore, we must outmaneuver them. The announcement made in Paris on January 6, 2026 was surgical. While the media focused on the noise coming from Washington, Carney, standing outside the Ukraine coalition venue, announced that Governor General Mary Simon and Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand would be traveling to Greenland in the first week of February to open a new Canadian consulate. To the casual observer, opening a consulate sounds like mundane bureaucracy. To the geopolitical strategist, it was a masterstroke. By placing the Governor General, Canada's head of state and an Inuk leader, on the ground in Greenland, Canada is creating a physical and diplomatic tripwire. It is a signal to Washington that Greenland is not empty real estate available for purchase or conquest. It is a sovereign territory with deep, binding ties to its neighbors. You cannot annex a territory where your closest neighbor and biggest trade partner has just planted a flag of friendship without triggering a catastrophic diplomatic crisis that goes far beyond Denmark. This move effectively places Canada between the hammer of American aggression and the anvil of Danish sovereignty. It changes the calculus for the White House. It is much harder to launch a limited military operation or a coerced annexation when the leadership of Canada is physically present, shaking hands and signing accords. Furthermore, Carney's rhetoric in Paris was disciplined. He did not engage in name-calling. He did not offer emotional denunciations. He simply stated facts. We stand with Denmark. We stand with Greenland. Our closest partnership is with the United States, and we'll work with everybody to make sure that we move forward together. Notice the hierarchy in that statement. First, unequivocal support for the threatened ally. Second, acknowledgement of the U.S. partnership. He placed the defense of international law above the relationship with the U.S. This is a profound shift in Canadian foreign policy, which has traditionally prioritized the relationship with Washington above all else. It signals that Canada is no longer willing to be a silent partner in the dismantling of Western security. While the diplomatic maneuvering took place in Paris, the domestic messaging delivered by the Prime Minister in Nunavut was equally critical, shifting the focus from external threats to the economics of sovereignty. Addressing the nation from the Arctic, Carney reframed the narrative from one of fear to one of internal strength. For our generation, who lived through the inflation of the 70s and the fiscal consolidations of the 90s, the economic message is paramount. We understand that a nation that cannot pay its bills cannot defend its borders. Carney's focus on operational tightening and productivity is a recognition that economic sovereignty is the foundation of political sovereignty. When pressed by reporters about the potential for U.S. tariffs or trade wars, the tool Trump has used to bludgeon other nations into submission, Carney refused to take the bait. His response was telling: we can give ourselves more than anything that President Trump or any other trade partner can take away. This is a rejection of the victim mentality. It suggests that Canada's prosperity is not a gift granted by the United States, but a result of our own resources, labor, and ingenuity. It is a pivot toward self-reliance. If the United States wants to close its markets or levy tariffs on steel and aluminum Canada's response will not be to beg for exemptions, but to tighten operations, diversify markets, and build an economy robust enough to withstand the pressure. Carney's handling of the fentanyl and jobs rhetoric used by the U.S. president was also astute. By agreeing with the premise that we all want to end the drug crisis and create high-paying jobs, he neutralized the political weapon. He framed the issue as a shared domestic challenge rather than a point of conflict, all while refusing to concede an inch on the issue of sovereignty. This Nunavut Doctrine, if we may call it that, emphasizes that the defense of the Arctic is not just about military hardware. It is about economic investment in the North. It is about proving that we occupy and steward our land effectively. The announcement of strategic investments in Nunavut is Canada putting its money where its mouth is. We are telling the world, this is ours. We are investing in it. We are not leaving. Do you agree with this Nunavut Doctrine of focusing on internal economic strength rather than retaliatory tariffs? Is this the right move, or is it too passive? I'd be very interested to read your thoughts on Carney's economic strategy. Perhaps the most fascinating development of this week is the shift in European sentiment, signaling the emergence of a new alliance architecture where Canada is viewed as the reliable alternative. For 70 years, whenever there was trouble in Europe, heads of state looked to Washington. Today, they are looking at Washington with fear and looking to Ottawa with hope. This is not because Canada has suddenly become a military superpower. It is because reliability has become the most scarce and valuable currency in international relations. In a world of chaos, the boring reliability of Canada is a strategic asset. Following the Paris meeting, reports surfaced that Finnish President Alexander Stubb and other European leaders sought private meetings with Carney. These are not social calls. Finland, sharing a massive border with Russia, understands existential threats. They see in Canada a partner that understands the Arctic, respects treaties, and is not prone to sudden, irrational reversals of policy. We are witnessing the emergence of a new North Atlantic architecture where Canada serves as the pivot point. If the U.S. retreats into isolationism and aggression, Canada becomes the primary link between the democracies of North America and the democracies of Europe. We are becoming the Davos of democracy, the safe harbor where the rules are still respected. This shift brings immense responsibility. It requires us to be serious about our commitments. We can no longer be the freeloaders of NATO, as we have often been accused. If we are to lead, we must contribute. The discussion of a citizen defense force or expanded reserves, which has been circulating in policy circles, speaks to this new seriousness. We are moving from a peacekeeping mindset to a sovereignty protection mindset. However, as we embrace this new role, we must be clear-eyed about the sovereign risks we face, understanding that the threat is not just external, it is internal. The logic that threatens Greenland, resource acquisition disguised as security, could easily be turned against Canadian provinces. We have seen concerning rhetoric from political elements within Canada that align closely with the ideology of the current U.S. administration. There are those who, frustrated by domestic policies, have flirted with the idea of closer integration with the U.S., even echoing the 51st state rhetoric. In the context of the Nunavut Doctrine, this is incredibly dangerous. We must look at the lesson of history. In 1938, the justification for the annexation of the Sudetenland was the protection of ethnic Germans and the stability of the region. The aggressor exploited internal divisions within Czechoslovakia to justify invasion. Today, we see a potential parallel. If political polarization in provinces like Alberta is exploited by Washington using the pretext of energy security or protecting American investments, Canada could face a Donbass-style scenario. The rhetoric coming from some corners of the opposition, cheering on the U.S. administration or dismissing the threat to Greenland as a distraction, shows a dangerous naivety. When a neighbor burns down a house on your street, you do not cheer for the arsonist. You check your own fire insurance. This is why national unity is now a national security issue. We may disagree on tax policy, healthcare, or environmental regulations, but on the issue of Canadian sovereignty, there can be no daylight between our political parties. The moment we allow foreign powers to drive a wedge between the provinces and the federal government, we invite the very aggression we seek to avoid. This is a difficult question, but it must be asked. Do you see signs of this fracture in your own community? Are we united enough as a people to resist this kind of external pressure? Please share your observations below. It's crucial we understand what's happening on the ground. Beyond the immediate political maneuvers, we must peel back one final layer to expose the economic engine driving this aggression. The brutal, high-stakes race for the critical minerals that will define the 21st century. The threat to Greenland and the pressure on the Canadian Arctic are not coincidental. They are symptomatic of a United States that has realized perhaps too late that it lacks the domestic resources to win the technological arms race against China. We are moving into an era dominated by artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, and renewable energy grids. These technologies do not run on good intentions. They run on lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. The United States, having outsourced its mining and refining capacity decades ago, is now in a state of resource panic. This resource insecurity is the true author of the Nunavut Doctrine. When Washington looks north, they do not just see snow and ice. They see the periodic table of elements waiting to be extracted. They see the Canadian Shield and Greenland's glacial deposits as the necessary fuel for their reindustrialization. This fundamentally changes the nature of our relationship. We are no longer just a friendly neighbor. In their eyes, we are a strategic warehouse. This is where the contrast between American extraction and Canadian stewardship becomes a moral imperative. The American model, as evidenced by the rhetoric surrounding Greenland, is one of seizure and unilateral control, a 19th century mindset applied to 21st century needs. It views environmental protections and Indigenous land rights not as essential components of governance, but as bureaucratic obstacles to be bulldozed in the name of national security. Conversely, Canada has spent the last decade painstakingly building a critical mineral strategy that attempts to balance extraction with Indigenous partnership and environmental sustainability. It is slower, yes. It is more complex, certainly. But it is the only way to develop resources without destroying the social fabric of the country. If we allow the U.S. to dictate the terms of our resource development, either through economic coercion or political interference in our provinces, we are not just losing revenue, we are losing our soul. We would be reverting to the status of a hewer of wood and drawer of water, but this time stripped of the dignity of self-determination. This is the hidden front of the war for sovereignty. It is fought in mining permits, in environmental assessments, and in the boardrooms where the future of the Northwest Passage is decided. For our generation, the baby boomers, this resonates with a particular historical poignancy. We are the generation that debated the Free Trade Agreement of 1988. We remember the fierce arguments about whether economic integration would lead to cultural assimilation. We were told then that trade would make us prosperous and secure, and for a long time it did. But the deal was based on the premise of a rules-based partner. That partner has left the building. We are now facing a partner that does not want to trade for our resources. They want to secure them. The difference between those two words is the difference between a partnership and a possession. Therefore, the defense of our sovereignty today is the closing act of our generation's contribution to Canada. We built the healthcare system, we built the pension funds. Now, we must ensure the physical and economic integrity of the nation that sustains them. If we fail to understand that the Arctic is the Mediterranean of the future, the central maritime route of global trade, and if we fail to hold it against the pressure from the south, we leave our children and grandchildren a fragmented, hollowed-out state. This is not hyperbole. It is the cold, hard calculus of a resource-hungry world. For our demographic, the baby boomers, these geopolitical shifts are not abstract. They have tangible economic implications for our retirement and security. We have spent our lives contributing to the Canadian pension plan, building equity in our homes, and relying on a healthcare system that, while imperfect, is a cornerstone of our identity. The Americanization of our economy or our political system puts these assets at risk. An annexation of resources or a forced integration into a U.S.-centric economic sphere would likely come with demands to dismantle our public services to align with the American model. The U.S. healthcare system, with its immense costs and lack of universal coverage, is not a model we wish to import. Yet, economic integration under duress often leads to policy harmonization. Furthermore, the stability of our retirement savings is tied to the stability of the Canadian state. A Canada that is viewed as a vassal state or a resource colony will not attract the kind of stable long-term investment that sustains our pension funds. The Carney Doctrine of economic sovereignty is, therefore, also a doctrine of retirement security. By building a robust, independent economy that trades with the world, not just the U.S., we protect the value of the Canadian dollar and the integrity of our social safety net. As we look toward February, when Governor General Mary Simon and Minister Anita Anand travel to Greenland, we face a critical test of our national will. This is a historical inflection point. They are not just opening an office. They are drawing a line in the ice. This mission will be watched by every capital in NATO. If Canada falters, if we bow to pressure from Washington to cancel the trip, the message will be clear. Canada is a satellite, not a sovereign nation. But if they go, and they will go, it sends a message of defiance and strength that money cannot buy. It demonstrates that Canada is prepared to lead the zone-free world in a way we haven't since the days of Lester B. Pearson. But unlike Pearson's era, where we acted as a mediator between superpowers, today we are acting as a bulwark against one. This transition from American dependence to Canadian sovereignty is not something that will happen in the future. It is happening right now, in real time. It is happening in the strategic choices being made in Ottawa, in the diplomatic cables flying between Paris and Copenhagen, and in the operational tightening of our economy. Ultimately, friends, the era of assuming American dominance and benevolence is over, and the era of Canadian responsibility has begun. This transition is frightening, yes. It carries risks, but it also carries a tremendous opportunity for national renewal. We are being forced to grow up. For too long, we have allowed our foreign policy and our economic strategy to be defined by our proximity to the United States. We accepted a junior partner role in exchange for protection and market access. That deal has been unilaterally canceled by the other side. Now, we must stand on our own 2 feet. We must build the diplomatic infrastructure, the military capacity, and the economic resilience to define our own future. The response from Prime Minister Carney, measured, strategic, and unyielding, shows that the leadership is there. But leadership requires the support of the citizenry. It requires us, the public, to look beyond the sensationalism of the 24-hour news cycle and understand the deep currents moving beneath the surface. It requires us to reject the voices of division that would sell out our sovereignty for short-term political gain. It requires us to recognize that being Canadian in 2026 means something different than it did in 2016. It means being the adult in the room. It means being the reliable partner. It means being the nation that respects sovereignty when others threaten it. When the history of this century is written, the events of this week in Paris and the upcoming mission to Greenland may well be seen as the moment Canada truly came of age. We are no longer defined by who we are next to, but by who we are. We are prepared. We are capable. And as the world looks for a beacon of stability in a storm of chaos, they are finding it, surprisingly, in the true north, strong and free. Thank you for your time and your attention to these critical matters. Let us remain vigilant, let us remain united, and let us support the work necessary to keep this country sovereign and secure. If you found this analysis valuable, please share it with a friend or family member who needs to hear this. We need an informed citizenry now more than ever, and I want to hear from you. When the Governor General lands in Greenland in February, do you think Washington will back down? Leave your predictions below.